Alyssa Grant never set out to disappear. She was precise, disciplined, an experienced backpacker with a reliable pack and boots softened by countless trails. At 29, Alyssa had scaled the icy ridges of the Rockies and crossed volcanic plains in Iceland. But that spring she chose something different, the open, echoing barrens of Silver Mesa. No visitor centers, no day hikers, just her, the wind, and the sun-bleached stone. On a Friday morning in May, beneath a sky that stretched forever and held its secrets tight, she waved to her upstairs neighbor in Arroyo Bend, dropped a spare key through his mail slot, and drove 3 hours south to the Red Bluff trailhead. Her aging blue Subaru Forester was later found neatly parked, windows cracked to release the heat. Inside, nothing hinted she intended to be gone beyond the weekend. Alyssa had told colleagues she needed quiet, a reset. She'd just left a position at a biotech firm in Denver, relocated to Arroyo Bend for solitude, and spent her days cataloging high desert wildflowers for a local nonprofit. Friends said she wasn't fleeing, at least not obviously, but she'd grown more contemplative, guarded, inward. She spoke often about dreams, about forgotten places that seemed to call to her. The Silver Mesa Loop had been on her list for months. The area had once hosted stagecoach lines, cattle drives, and whispered rumors of an abandoned homestead hidden in the cliffs. The terrain wasn't labeled dangerous, only immense, sun-hammered, and confusing if you lost your bearings. And Alyssa was nothing if not careful. She packed light but smart. Water, spare maps, a satellite beacon, and the weather-resistant journal she carried on every solo trek. Her last confirmed sighting came at 10:14 a.m. at a gas station along Highway 63. She bought trail mix, filled her jugs, chatted briefly with the cashier. She said she'd be back Sunday night. Then she was gone. No distress call. No final ping. Just her car baking in the heat and a trailhead sign slowly fading under desert wind. Alyssa Grant stepped into the sand-red silence and never came back out. She'd texted her younger sister Emily at 8:41 a.m., a single message without a photo. Starting out now, Red Bluff Loop clockwise, check-in Sunday. It marked her intent, but offered little help when the silence came. The Red Bluff Loop wound 23 miles through wind-cut ridges and chalky dry washes. It crossed fossilized dunes and dropped into gulches where rain hadn't fallen in decades. Yet the draw wasn't the landscape itself, but what lay beyond it. Locals whispered about the stagecoach house, the skeletal remains of a cabin said to belong to a hermit miner in the 1930s. No road led there. No official path pointed to it, but hikers spoke of it as a rite of passage. Reach it, you take a picture. Be brave, you step inside. In Alyssa's apartment, later searched by deputies, her notebooks referenced the cabin more than once. Sketches, coordinates, a single cryptic line. What's buried isn't always lost. Her plan had been to tackle Raven Hollow first and climb the ridge second, a wise tactic for desert heat, keeping shade in the morning and wind on the way out. She was supposed to make camp near Dead Horse Wash, a dry river scar slashing through redstone, then push to the stagecoach house on day 2. It wasn't reckless. It was textbook. Even her gear list reflected composure. Purification drops, emergency flare, twin lighters, no more than 10 miles per day. But something shifted. Somewhere between that first mile and her intended campsite, the trail stopped telling its story. Search teams later retracing her loop found only one line of prints heading southwest along the wash. No return tracks, no detours, no marks of panic or wildlife, just a steady pace on the canyon floor, then nothing. Her satellite beacon never pinged. Her GPS watch, if she wore it, never surfaced. The plateau had swallowed her without a sound, and though the loop appeared on every local map, no one really knew where the stagecoach house stood. Some swore it had burned decades ago. Others insisted it still crouched somewhere out of sight, waiting for those who weren't looking for it. Alyssa had been looking. By Monday morning, the absence had hardened into fear. Alyssa's Subaru still sat in the sun, its tires half sunk into dust, a thin film of pollen on the windshield. When she failed to appear at work or answer calls, Emily phoned the county sheriff. Deputies hiked in from the trailhead, calling her name into wind-scoured canyons. They found nothing except a single plastic bottle wedged under a rock near Dead Horse Wash. No fingerprints, no teeth marks, nothing to show how long it had been there. Within 48 hours, search and rescue volunteers, drones, and even a borrowed bloodhound scoured the mesas. Helicopters circled like dragonflies, their blades throwing shadows over redstone cliffs. Maps were pinned to the walls of a temporary command tent at the trailhead. Coordinates were crossed off, redrawn, circled again. The desert refused to give anything back. Reporters from Albuquerque and Phoenix descended on Arroyo Bend, filling the small diner with tripods and microphones. Old-timers at the counter whispered about others who had gone missing near the stagecoach house. 2 college students in 1997, a geologist in 2008. Stories dismissed as rumor until Alyssa vanished. Emily stood in front of the cameras clutching her sister's trail journal, begging for information, her voice hoarse from the dry wind. By the end of the first week, the official search wound down. "No evidence of foul play," the sheriff told the press. "We have to assume she left the marked path and became disoriented." But volunteers kept coming, some drawn by curiosity, some by superstition. They described strange echoes in the gullies at dusk, shapes at the edge of sight, boot prints that seemed to appear and then fade overnight. For Emily, every unconfirmed sighting, every scrap of rumor became a new thread to pull. She began driving the back roads herself, taping missing person flyers to sun-bleached fences, questioning gas station clerks and drifters. At night, she pored over Alyssa's notes, tracing the coordinates with a pen until the paper tore. If the stagecoach house existed, Emily would find it, or at least find what had taken her sister. 2 months after the official search ended, summer storms rolled across the mesa, carving new scars into old gullies. A flash flood tore out a section of the Red Bluff Trail, scattering cairns and erasing boot prints that had clung to the hardpan. By then, Emily had transformed from grieving sister to reluctant investigator. She mapped every rumor on a corkboard in her kitchen, string and pins weaving a tangle of possible paths. She spoke with retired rangers, ghost town hunters, and an aging prospector who swore he'd camped near the stagecoach house in the 70s. His description matched none of the online maps: a stone chimney, half a wagon wheel leaning against a wall, and a set of steps descending into rock. It wasn't just a cabin, he rasped. It was a doorway. Emily copied every word into her notebook. Meanwhile, online forums lit up. Strangers compared satellite images, uploaded drone footage, speculated about sinkholes, cults, and unsurveyed mine shafts. Someone even produced a grainy photograph of a shadowy shape at the mouth of a canyon they claimed was the house. Authorities dismissed it as pareidolia, a rock arch catching the evening light. But the image spread, and with it a story larger than Alyssa herself, a story of vanishings, secret rooms, and echoes in the cliffs. One evening, Emily drove out alone, parking where the pavement ended and the dirt track began. She hiked until the stars rose, the air thin and electric, the smell of sage and iron in every breath. At a dry wash, she stopped, convinced she could hear something below the hiss of the wind. Not her sister's voice exactly, but a trace of her, like a word at the edge of memory. She stayed there until cold seeped up from the stone, then turned back, headlights carving a narrow path through darkness. Alyssa Grant's name had already slipped from most headlines by then, replaced by new stories of loss and disaster. Yet for Emily, the desert remained unfinished, a question with no punctuation. Every storm that passed over the mesas felt like a message she couldn't translate. Somewhere beyond the marked trails lay a cabin that might never have existed, and in its shadow, perhaps, the last footprint of her sister. Emily couldn't look away. Not now, when Alice was still out there. Or whatever remained of her. Months after the official search had ended, Emily kept going. Emails, phone calls, press inquiries, most went unanswered. Sometimes polite replies came. Sometimes the messages were ignored entirely. But the silence didn't stop her. It only redirected her efforts. In 2018, she launched a podcast called Desert Trails. At first, it wasn't just about Alice, but about disappearances in the wilderness, desert legends, and the gaps between mapped and unmapped territory. The first season focused on Alice's story. Emily told it from the very beginning, her voice calm, steady, but full of determination. Listeners were drawn not by drama, but by the haunting stillness of it all. Footprints, the tent, static videos, the absence of everything else. Then she began collecting other people's accounts. Hikers, campers, ranchers wrote about strange encounters, lights, sounds, footprints. Emily recorded the interviews, asking the same questions every time. Where were you? What did you see? What did you feel? She no longer chased answers. She chased patterns. One man reported that in 2020, while hiking the remote sections of Copperstone Ridge, he found a pile of stones carefully arranged in a spiral. In the center lay a rock etched with a single symbol, a triangle inside a circle. Emily didn't tell him that Alice had drawn that same shape dozens of times in her journals. Another woman recounted seeing a red figure from a distance. She assumed it was a hiker, but it remained in the exact same spot for nearly 2 hours. Emily never speculated or sensationalized. She let the stories speak for themselves. Yet in every episode, there was a pause, a moment when her voice dropped to a whisper, conveying the ache, the stubborn, exhausted hope. Emily still believed Alice was out there. Maybe not alive, maybe not in a way most people would understand. But she was there. By late spring 2019, almost 3 years after Alice disappeared, a solo traveler stumbled upon something no one expected. Daniel Quaid, a geology student from Utah, was mapping remote sandstone formations for a project. Amid a dry wash, he spotted a carefully stacked bundle of papers, partially hidden under stones and sealed in a clear pouch. Faded by the sun, the edges coated in red dust, the ink warped by moisture, the writing remained legible. Diary-like notes mixed with dreamlike fragments, dated July 31st, a week after Alice was supposed to return. Emily received the call a week later. She met Daniel, gloves on, heart racing as she read the first line. I don't know. Time doesn't work here. The entries were erratic. Some described the terrain. Others read like dreams. She woke in places she hadn't fallen asleep in, heard strange noises among the rocks, always felt watched, yet never saw who or what. One passage stood out. I see the cabin at night. It's never in the same place. Sometimes smoke rises from the chimney. Sometimes the door is open. But I don't go. I don't think you come back if you do. Forensics later confirmed the handwriting. It was Alice. No footprints, no other signs of human presence. Only the pouch, half buried, half forgotten, as if left for someone else to find, or as a marker in case she never returned. The park didn't reopen the case, but Emily did. She relaunched the podcast with a new season, The Lost Pages. Slowly, something began to stir in the desert. By 2020, a small but growing group of drone hobbyists had turned their attention to the region. Not professionals, weekend explorers with high-resolution cameras. They scanned cliffs, washes, and heat anomalies. Most footage revealed only empty terrain, but occasionally, a corner of a roof, a shadow too straight to be natural, a glint of glass. Then gone. The videos reached Emily, and in one of them, barely visible through the sun and distance, a red figure appeared. It stood perfectly still for exactly 3 frames. Too upright for a bird, too stationary for an animal, and then it was gone. No one noticed in real time, only during careful playback. Emily didn't rush to share it. She watched the frame over and over. It wasn't about whether it was Alice. She was asking why it stood so still. The red figure, unmoving against the desert backdrop, felt like a signal, an invitation and a warning at once. The footage was sent to 2 labs, one in Oregon, one in Virginia. Both confirmed. Raw, untampered, metadata intact. The figure appeared in exactly 3 frames, no more, no less. Analysts examined pixels, shadows, even atmospheric distortions, building 3D terrain models to study the lighting. The results were unsettling. The figure was 3-dimensional, casting a shadow toward the bluff's edge, completely still. Emily looked at the screen again. Something inside shifted. The red figure was real, and it seemed to be waiting. Emily didn't sleep that night. The image of the red figure burned in her mind. She felt a pull, like the desert itself was calling her, urging her to go further than anyone had before. She packed her gear before dawn: backpack, notebook, camera, and a small handheld drone. She left a note for her roommate, just in case. "I'm following the trail. Don't wait for me." The path was rough, largely unmapped, but Emily had spent years studying Alice's journals. She knew the patterns, the hidden washes, the small cliffs that didn't appear on official maps. Hours into her hike, she came across what looked like the remnants of a campsite. Burned logs, charred fabric, footprints that weren't quite human. Her heart raced. Every instinct told her she was close. By midday, the landscape shifted. Juniper trees grew twisted and close together, their bark scarred by wind and sand. She stopped. Carved into one of the trees were fresh initials, a 2025. Her breath caught. The year was current, but the style matched Alice's handwriting perfectly. Could Alice really still be out here? Or was someone else leaving signs in her name? Emily deployed her drone, letting it hover ahead. The camera transmitted live images of the desert floor, winding canyons, scattered boulders, and then, almost imperceptibly, a glint of red. She moved closer, every step careful, the desert silent around her. And there it was, a cabin. Not burned, not ruined, but strangely intact, hidden in a small alcove of rock. The roof was warped, blackened in patches, yet it stood as if preserved by some force she couldn't understand. Emily approached slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, yet curiosity propelled her forward. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and something else, metallic, sharp. The floor creaked under her weight. On the far wall, symbols carved deeply into the wood, circles within circles, triangles inside rings, and a spiral she had seen before in the juniper bark. She traced one with her gloved hand, and a shiver ran down her spine. They weren't random. They were messages. Then she noticed the bones. Not scattered, not like animal remains. Arranged, intentional, stacked beneath a fallen beam. Only fragments, but enough to make her stomach twist. Emily forced herself to look away, but something caught her eye at the corner of the cabin. A movement, a shadow, red, standing perfectly still. Her heart raced. Slowly, she lifted her camera and recorded. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply watched. Emily whispered Alice's name. Nothing. Then, as she adjusted the lens, the red form shifted slightly. A tilt of the head, deliberate, almost human. And then it vanished. Emily sat outside for hours, the sun dipping below the cliffs. The cabin seemed to breathe around her, alive in a way she couldn't explain. She realized the desert hadn't been hiding Alice. It had been guiding her. Every symbol, every carved initial, every abandoned pouch. It was all a breadcrumb trail. And now, she was at the end of it. That night, she recorded a short podcast episode, The Cabin in the Red Shadows. No music, no embellishment, just her voice recounting the discovery, the symbols, the bones, and the red figure. She didn't speculate. She asked only one question. If someone disappears, but leaves their presence behind, can we ever truly say they're gone? The episode went live, and the response was immediate. Messages poured in. Hikers, amateur drone pilots, even retired rangers who claimed they had glimpsed the red figure themselves. The desert had been whispering for decades, but now people were starting to listen. Emily knew one thing for certain. Alice wasn't done with her story. The desert was alive with secrets, and the red figure, whether Alice herself or something else, was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the legend waited, watching, patient. And Emily had taken the first real step into the unknown. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the frame. The red figure stood motionless, as if embedded in the desert landscape itself. Its posture was strangely familiar, as if she had seen it before in old family photos, on hiking trails, even in Alice's dreams. Emily's heart raced, her breath blending with the desert wind. The next morning, she returned to the site with a drone and a new camera. This time, she wasn't alone. Alex, a podcast volunteer and 3D terrain specialist, accompanied her. Together, they circled the cabin and its surroundings, checking every corner, every crevice. And then they saw it. On the south side of the cabin, just at the base of a bluff, faint tracks. At first, Emily thought it was a trick of the light, but the footprints were real. Bare footprints leading into a narrow canyon, disappearing into the shadow of the rocks. "This can't be," Emily whispered. "No one has been here for years." Alex just nodded. He had seen them too, and his face had turned pale. They followed the tracks, stepping cautiously on the soft sand. Each step felt like walking on the edge of reality and dream. The desert was empty, yet not silent. The rustle of the wind, the creak of old trees, strange shadows flickering between the rocks. Suddenly, Emily noticed movement. Red. Just like in the video. The figure stood at the edge of a small ledge, bathed in sunlight, motionless like a stone statue. "Alice," Emily whispered, but the only answer was the soft whistle of the wind. The figure slowly turned its head, and Emily felt a strange warmth and, at the same time, a chill. Her heart tightened. It was familiar, almost like the presence of someone she once knew, but now in another form. Then the figure vanished, dissolving into the sunlight. Yet the tracks remained. They led further, to a narrow passage between the rocks, where no one had stepped for years. Emily launched her drone and began recording. The camera glided through the canyon, and for a moment, she saw the red spot again on one of the ledges. Only this time, it almost blended with the sand and stones, as if the desert itself was hiding it. "She's here," Emily said, clutching her notebook, "and she's waiting." She returned to her camp, but her mind wouldn't let go. The desert was no longer just a place. It was a living memory, a guardian of secrets. And Emily knew one thing. Alice's story wasn't over, as long as someone was still watching these tracks, listening to the wind, and understanding that someone was still walking here, among the sands. Emily walked along the narrow trail between the rocks, following the barely visible footprints. The red figure seemed to be hiding somewhere ahead, leaving behind only shadows and strange markings on the stones, symbols reminiscent of those Alice had carved on the trees near the cabin. Every step made the sand crunch beneath her feet, but it felt as if the desert itself was watching, barely breathing. Suddenly, a crack in the rock crumbled, revealing something metallic underfoot, coated in red dust. Emily carefully picked it up. It was an old compass box, with strange lines and circles engraved on its lid. For a moment, it seemed these lines matched the patterns on the trees near the cabin. "This can't be a coincidence," she muttered. Then the wind shifted, and she heard a faint but unmistakable whisper, as if someone were repeating her name. Emily froze, her heart pounding, but it wasn't just the wind. The voice was female, soft, almost familiar. She realized Alice had left clues, readable only here, among these stones and the desert wind. The tracks led her to a small grotto hidden behind a bend in the rocks. Inside was a flat platform with symbols carved into the stone: circles, triangles, spirals. But this time a new element appeared, a small red stone, seemingly left as a signal. Emily understood. It was both an invitation and a warning at once. She launched her drone to illuminate the grotto from above. On the video, the red figure appeared again, standing on the edge of a ledge. But now it didn't vanish. It slowly descended toward the grotto and seemed to merge with the walls, leaving a faint shimmer behind. "Alice, are you here?" Emily whispered, unable to believe her eyes. At that moment, the notebook in her hands trembled slightly. On its margins, new notes appeared that she hadn't written. Short, precise words, as if Alice herself had penned them. "Look. Follow. Don't be afraid. Everything here is alive." Emily realized the desert had become more than just a place. It had become a guide. It whispered, pointed the way, and guarded secrets that could only be touched by those willing to listen. Emily took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and decided she would go further. Beyond the grotto, there was another door, hidden, buried under sand. And if Alice had left these signs for her, something awaited ahead that would change everything Emily knew about the desert, the red figure, and Alice herself. Emily stepped into the narrow grotto passage, carefully brushing sand off the path. The red figure was no longer on the ledge, yet its presence was felt everywhere, like a subtle vibration in the air. The symbols on the walls seemed alive, faintly glowing as Emily ran her hand over them. Suddenly, she noticed a small hatch, almost hidden beneath fallen stones. It was metal, with an intricate pattern that resembled the lines on the compass box. Emily realized this was the door to the place Alice had described in her journals, but no one had ever found. "Someone's here," she whispered to herself. She pushed the hatch. The creak of metal echoed across the desert, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Emily turned on her flashlight and stepped down. The air was cool and damp, unusual for the desert. And then she heard a quiet, barely audible laugh. It was familiar, just the kind Alice left in her notes, a sign that someone was watching, but not harming. The staircase led to a spacious underground chamber. The walls were covered with repeating symbols, now looking like maps, routes, points, lines readable only in a certain order. In the center stood the red figure, now almost tangible, like a shadow drawn from the desert itself. "Emily," came Alice's familiar voice, soft but firm. "You've made it. You see what I saw." The figure extended a hand, and the red light seemed to weave into the symbols on the walls, forming something like a living map, showing a path through the desert. Emily realized Alice wasn't just missing. She had become part of this desert, a guide for those willing to go further. "Can you go further?" the figure asked. "Or will you stay on the surface in safety?" Emily stepped forward. Every nerve screamed fear, but intuition told her this was her chance to know the truth. She touched the glowing map, and in that moment the space around her swirled. The symbols glowed brighter, and the desert seemed to speak. Suddenly, the red figure dissolved, leaving only a sense of presence. But new inscriptions appeared on the walls, only for Emily. "Now you know. Now you walk alone. Follow the light. Don't turn away. Everything begins anew." Emily understood. She had become the guardian of this secret. The desert was no longer just a place of disappearances. It had become the living, wise, silent guide. And Alice was with her, but no longer as before, as part of the desert itself, as energy guiding those seeking the truth. Emily emerged into the light, her gaze resolute. She knew the story of Alice and the desert would never end, but now she could share it with the world, not as a mystery, but as a path leading through darkness to the light. Emily returned to civilization with the feeling that the desert itself had released her. She carried records, photographs, and audio, proof that not all secrets vanish without a trace. This time, she was ready to tell the world. The first episode of her new podcast series was called Sand and Light. Emily spoke quietly, steadily, each word heavier than all previous episodes combined. She described the desert, the symbols, the red figure, the discovered bones, the underground chamber. Not as a sensation, but as evidence that sometimes disappearance is not an end, but a beginning. "Alice didn't leave," she said. "She became part of this place. She is alive, but not in the form we are used to understanding. She is a guiding energy, waiting for those brave enough to seek." Comments and letters came by the dozens. People shared their stories, confirmed symbols, spoke of strange lights, sounds, and the sense of being watched. Gradually, a small community formed around the podcast, not seeking closure, but understanding. One night, Emily received an unsigned letter. Inside was a photograph. The red figure stood on the desert horizon, just as she had seen it in the grotto. At the bottom, barely visible, was the inscription, "You have seen. Now it's your turn to lead." Emily smiled and took a deep breath. The desert does not let go. It watches. It chooses those ready to go further. And now Emily knew. She was not alone. She was part of this story. She turned on her camera and began recording. Not a podcast, not evidence, but a message for those who would come after. The desert holds more than we can understand. But if you listen, if you tread carefully, it will show the way. Don't fear disappearing. Don't fear searching. And if you see the light, follow it. The red figure appeared again in the distance, nearly invisible, like a flicker of fire. And this time Emily knew. This invitation does not end. It only begins.